Jazzcast Pros.
Hello and welcome back to High Vibe Table Talks. I'm your host, Marshawn Hargrave. And if you listened to my last episode, you may recall that I was looking for a full-time job. And I kind of broke down why I was looking for a new position, what type of position I was looking for. And I also said, High Vibe Table Talks isn't going anywhere. And then I went radio silent for a couple of weeks. So I'm sorry, Jazzy, and thank you for being so patient with me because I have found a new position and I did start that position. Everything kind of happened pretty quickly. I did wait a little bit to share what I was doing on the podcast. So there was a delay between when I started looking and when that was released. But everything with this new company, unfolded really quickly. Like I applied for the job and then I got an email a couple days later and then we, scheduled the first interview for the following week, second interview for the following week, third interview the following week after that. So it all happened within April. Like I can't remember exactly when my first interview date was, but it was somewhere end of March, beginning of April, and my first day was April 29th. So it all happened very quickly. And so I will share actually on LinkedIn when this goes live. But the company is called Paychecks. It is a Rochester based company, but it is a global company. It was actually started by a Rochesterian, Tom Golisano. Actually, when I went to the Golisano Institute for Entrepreneurship a couple of years ago when they opened, which is actually a really great initiative that he started in Rochester for people who maybe don't want to go to college, but they want some formal education and how to be an entrepreneur. They can go there. It's very affordable and you can learn about entrepreneurship. Anyways, I went there for their grand opening. I was invited there by this guy I'd met while networking. And so during the opening ceremonies, Tom Golisano spoke. And it was really interesting to hear about his experience in starting a business, the ups and downs, the highs and lows. Like one of my favorite stories actually is that so he got started with like $2,000 in a dream, and actually the $2,000 wasn't his; it was his aunt and uncle's that he borrowed from them. And when they signed one of their first like big clients, because he was working for another payroll company, but really wanted to help small businesses with payroll. That company was really helping enterprise level businesses with payroll, and he wanted to help the like companies that had less than 5 employees. And so that's how he started it. And when he, signed his first bigger client, he brought like him and the two people that run his team out to dinner to celebrate. And he went to go run his credit card and it declined because it was maxed out. Just the heart and soul of like what a true entrepreneurship journey can be, like celebrating and also being devastated at the same time. And the last thing that one of the last ratings I was on, they were talking about how they used to keep all of the payroll on file on paper for customers, and this was like in maybe the 80s, and they'd opened this location where they keeping everything, and it was the winter and the pipes burst and water went everywhere, ruining everything. And at that point he was really like, is this even worth it? I'm so like, just I always talk about the messy middle of entrepreneurship because we can look at Tom Golisano, who he is a billionaire. He was he still lives in Rochester, and he is a billionaire. I will have feelings about billionaires, but that's besides the point. And because you look at the Golisano name, and they have a children's hospital here in Rochester. I know they have other children's hospitals. He's created the Golisano Institute. He's done incredible charitable things. He's helped uplift a lot of communities, and he's created a lot of jobs for people through Paychecks. And so, what my role is at Paychex is I am in sales, which I'm very excited about. It's actually an inbound sales position. And so, all of my other sales roles and why I created Sales Prospecting Simplified is because I was in an outbound position, reaching out to people saying, hey, educating them on this product and then bringing them into the universe. this is different. And so people are reaching out to Paychecks, whether they're filling out a form or they find us online or calling in. However, they are finding out about Paychecks, and then we get that inquiry and then we get to call them, which has its pros and cons. But the first thing I'm very excited about is that I get to use a different set of sales skills. Like I've never been in an inbound role, and so I guess you could consider the Pilates studio somewhat inbound, but we did a lot of outreach as well. Going into the community and partnering with different businesses and going to different networking events. But this is purely virtual, and it is all inbound. Which is very exciting because when I reach out to company X, I'm going to be like, I can say, hey, I saw that you filled out a form on our website or whatever it is. And they could say, oh, yeah, I did. Okay, well, tell me about your business, so on and so forth. And so that part is exciting to me. The double edged sword of that is when you have that an inbound role, your quota is higher. And so I'm not quite at a point, obviously, I just recently started where the quota is impacting me quite yet, but it will. In previous sales roles, my quota was very low because it was a long sales cycle. This is a very short sales cycle. So that is just going something that comes with the territory of an inbound sales lead, which I'm excited to take on that challenge. One of my favorite parts is that, we're really holding hands and partnering with these small businesses, which is at such the heart of high vibe of like these people started this business, they are growing and they're at the point where they're hiring an employee, whether they're bringing themselves on to payroll or they're bringing on additional employees, which is like again, such at the heart and soul of what I'm so passionate about is helping small businesses. And bringing on a new employee can be really scary, can feel very overwhelming. It's an exciting place in business to be, but there's a lot of unknown, there's a lot of education. And so, educating small business owners and bringing them peace of mind in this piece of their business is something that I now get to do every day. So, that's really exciting. The other piece that I'm really excited about, all of my sales training, I would say most of my sales training up until this point, when I was with Dealer Docs previously, there was no sales training with Dealer Docs. I was in that role told, all right, you got to go out and cold call. I didn't know how to cold call. I didn't know I didn't have a script. Like I just kind of made it up as I went along, and I started listening to Jeffrey Gitomer and I read Fanatical Prospecting by Jed Blunt, which if you've heard me talk about that book on this podcast previously. So it's Paychex takes their sales training very seriously. And just living in Rochester, you run into people who do work with Paychex or work for Paychex. And the people who work for Paychex specifically in the sales role talk about how in depth the sales training is. And so, I've seen it being this my first week in training this past week at the time of me recording this. But I'm just excited to really get an in depth training about the Paychex way to sell because obviously everybody sells differently. And even going through this training, I'm going through it with some other people who are coming into the team as well. I'm going to sell differently than they will. It's that there's a science to selling and there's an art to selling. The science is, are you making the dials? Are you doing the outreach? What are you hitting your KPIs? And then the art is when you get that person on the phone, how do you connect with them? What questions do you ask? How do you listen? How do you work through those conversations? And mine are going to be different than yours and are going to be different to anybody else. And so I'm excited to learn kind of both pieces of like the Paychex way. Being my first week, it is a little bit, I've never worked in such a corporate environment. That isn't good, it's not bad, it's just different. And so there's definitely some things that I'm getting used to with that. And, being my first week, I was nervous, but coming out on this side of it. As an entrepreneur and growing my business and living that entrepreneur life for the past couple of years, I am opening my arms wide to the structure and the stability. I'm someone, I don't know if it is like my ADHD specifically or what it is about my personality, my brain, but I have a hard time holding myself accountable to certain things. And so my brain would spin a lot on, I'd wake up, at the time I had to get Rowan on the bus. And then there would be some friction in, okay, that you should be journaling and you should be reading and you should be working out and all the shoulds. And on this podcast, I always talk about should is a shame word. And so to take it to try to reduce how often you're using it with yourself. Naturally, do as I say, not as I do. And that would start to creep up. And, and I would sometimes get on my phone and then turn into the scroll hole and then all of a sudden look back and go, you just wasted 2 hours. You could have been doing, and then like feeling more shame on myself. And um, so this built-in routine that I now have has been really nice. I've really enjoyed it. There have been a couple days where like Ryan and I will be watching TV and he's like, Marshawn, you can go to bed. I'm like, it's not even 9 o'clock. Why am I falling asleep? But it's a different energy throughout the day, especially being on in training. And I'm sure it's not going to go away that much being in a sales role where you're on the phone calling prospects a lot. But that has been really nice. I've really enjoyed that structure and routine, the forced structure. I could have created my own, but I will admit that I had a hard time sticking to it. And so that's been really nice. And then there's the other side of it of like I'm sprinting to lacrosse practice that starts at 5:30 when I'm getting out at 5, or my daughter's going on a field trip in a couple weeks, and this will be like the first field trip that I can't go because I've really had a lot of flexibility in my schedule since she started school, and I can't go to it. I'm sure that if this was next year I could, obviously, but I'm still in training, so I can't miss a training day. So there is that. But overall, I'm really, I'm excited about this next part. What does this mean for the podcast? I'm not totally sure yet. Not that I'm still really excited about this podcast, and because I think that I'm still going to be working with small businesses. Yes, in a very different capacity, and yes, on a very specific piece. But I think that I've been kind of spiraling out in connecting with small businesses over the past couple months just because of the heaviness of like trying to figure out what was next for High Vibe. So I'm excited to be in this space with small businesses again and just kind of like re-energize my connection with that space. And so that's kind of where I'm at. So I'm excited to, have guests on still. I'm trying to figure out when I can fit that into my schedule at the moment because, again, like I'm in training and so everything's very intensive and I have little control over my schedule at the moment, but we're going to figure it out. We're going to make it work. So, again, thank you, Jazzy, for being so patient with me. I am now officially a Paychex employee. I'm really enjoying it. And I'm going to be leaning into my Carly of like, making my 9 to 5 my angel investor, like being in sales for a very corporate company, there's a lot of money to be made. And could that help me invest in to High Vibe? I just have to figure out that balance at the moment, but I did it before. I'm excited to take on that challenge again. I started High Vibe when I was with Dealer Docs and I was able to use it to fuel myself in the business. And so yeah, we're gonna see where we're gonna go. But it just I didn't know where the steps were gonna take me about applying for a job, and I didn't know it was gonna take me here. And I have so much more to say about like the team that I'm on and like the things that I've been looking for. Like the least tenured person on my team has been there for like 3 years. So there's like not a lot of turnover in this role specifically, the trainer the other day said that this group specifically has the lowest turnover out of any department in paychecks, which feels like a really good sign. So, yeah, I have so much more to say on that, but that's where we're going to end for now because it just feels exciting to at least get that announcement out and into the world. So, thank you for listening. And remember that big dreams and small steps will transform. Big dreams and small steps will transform your life. And sometimes that small step is taking a 9 to 5.